But first, we have tonight's discussion in which we welcome Kimberly and Lester. As always, this is the short abbreviated version of a very good LinkedIn profile for both of our guests. Kimberly, who you may know as the co-founder and managing partner of PINTS LLC, also a former president of Arizona's Golden Eagle Distributors. Lester, chief economist for the NBWA, previously that role with the Beer Institute. Both have a lot of experience in the world of beer, most importantly, beer distribution and how beer goes from one place to the other and understanding that. Which is why we are chatting with them tonight. So Lester, Kimberly, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourselves to join the chat. Thank you so much for being here and sharing the insight. Great to have you.
Nice to be here.
Welcome.
One of the things that I think was really exciting about this chat was a lot of enthusiasm from members who really kind of run the gamut of both understanding some of the general basics of distribution, some into the nitty gritty. So we're going to cover a whole host of topics tonight. But Kimberly, I want to start with you because I think especially over the last few years, there has felt like there's been a lot of change. This isn't the title to this chat was cutesy, getting beer from here to there, but obviously there's a lot more that happens. Can you give a temperature for what the role of distribution is for the current era that we exist?
Well, I think that, the role of distribution is still sales and logistics for brewers. And I think it's really an important thing that they do from soup to nuts is that they are federally licensed and state licensed. They handle all of the logistics from warehousing to accounting to line cleaning to retailer orders. And I think that there's the role of a distributor is very important also in the community because they are the local eyes and ears in the community. They also, for the most part, are multi-generational companies still, and have played a role in the community for a very long period of time. So I feel like the role of distribution has changed over the years. I mean, we've seen, since I've been in the industry, we've seen a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and those will continue to evolve. And I think it's a very exciting time right now as we talk about convergence, and I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But the role of distribution really hasn't changed a lot since I got into the industry. It's always kind of remained the same of what a beer distributor does for the most part.
Lester, you're the data guy, chief economist for the National Beer Wholesalers Association. Could you give us a sense of, carry on maybe from what Kimberly was just saying too, from a numbers perspective, amongst other things, are there particular changes or things that have grown and shifted in recent years when it comes to distribution?
God, yeah. Where do you start? So everything has changed and shifted from beer distribution. What started basically as, local markets where beer distributors took care of very specific territories and areas and worked closely with much fewer brewers, evolved over time to almost tens of thousands of brewers. We really don't know how many brewers there are. We don't really know how many distributors are. We kind of get good guesses at both of these numbers. But the reality is that what beer distributors deal with today is radically different than what they dealt with in yesteryears, and how they deal with it is different. And the places that we're distributing beer to are immensely different than they ever were, from both on and off premise channels. We have this HEB right down the street here that is now putting in a beer garden. And, I've said it for years is that, if your grocery store is your bar, what the hell is on versus off premise? And how do you deal with that? They have taps and you can go shopping and you can buy food and you can sit outside and eat and listen to music, and that's a grocery store. So when an off premise channel becomes an on-premise entertainment venue, the world is a different place. So yeah, it's radically different. And when you look at packages and SKUs and styles and varieties and how those play out in the marketplace, it's a logistical challenge, but it's also finding the right beer for the right customer at the right time challenge as well.
Lester, it may not be entirely clear how many breweries there are. Is there an idea of how many distributors there are currently?
Well, what kind of distributors? Because we have small little importers that bring in very special, unique beer brands and distribute them in the very local ethnic markets. That's a beer distributor, right? But then we have very large companies that handle very specific channels, and that's a beer distributor. So how do we, first you got to say is, how do we define a beer distributor? Any wine and spirits distributor that carries some amount of beer is now suddenly a beer distributor, right? So when you go to like the census, for example, the census likes things in very clear, concise definitions. For example, if you're a business and you have both a restaurant and a brewery in it, the census wants to know which one you make more money off of. So if you make more money off of food, you, according to the census, are a restaurant and you are not a brewer. But if you make slightly more money off of beer than food, then suddenly you're a brewer and not a restaurant. So if I were to go to the US Census and download a bunch of data about breweries, I'm going to find that there's 4,000 breweries in this country, but I know there's a hell of at least twice that many. But those other guys have to tell the census how much money they make off of these two retail channels. And by definition, they are no longer breweries because they're restaurants. So, and that applies to beer distribution as well. We have lots of beer distributors that carry both beer, wine, and spirits, but the census wants you to be in either a beer wholesaler or a wine and spirit wholesalers. You can't be in both. Shame on you. But we have to recognize that wine and spirits guy who carries mostly wine and spirits also carries beer. So he's we're gonna count him in our club as well. So depending on whether you use the census or you go to like what we have a Beer Serves America. When we do Beer Serves America, we cast our umbrella widely. We say, hey, look, there's a little small wine and spirits distributor up in Idaho, and he's got a couple of trucks delivering beer. We're gonna put him on our side. So then we tend to get a lot more beer distributors, 3,000 plus in our club of beer distributors, even though some of them are mostly wine and spirits distributors. So it boils down to definitions, guys. How do we define these things? And then let's start counting them after that.
Well, Kimberly, let's go back to a word that you said, and I think we'll come back to a lot tonight: convergence.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions that we had submitted ahead of tonight's chat was kind of trying to determine if there's a way to pick apart any differences from the host of options and companies that Lester just mentioned. So, it could be a small person who focuses on imports, or maybe someone who just focuses on local craft brands, or maybe it's a house that sells just a ton of Miller or Bud. What is the difference between these varieties of distributors in terms of what they do and who they are, whether it's craft or boutique or self-distributed?
Well, I think a lot of it boils down to scale and what the focus for that distributor is. If they're selling a lot of volume and that's primarily a larger distributor, they're calling on chain stores, they're calling on all channels, C stores. Some of the boutique distributors that you'll see only call on like certain channels. Either they might only focus on premise, they don't do any chains. So it all depends on the type of products that they sell and the route to market. So when you think about, traditional beer distributors, independent beer distributors, as we talk about it, they're particularly large scale, go to all channels of the trade. But when you talk about the boutique, they don't handle all those channels of the trade. So it's really up to the suppliers to make those types of decisions as to what they want from their distributor partners and ask those questions and do their due diligence about what they want to be in the marketplace. Do they just want to be on premise, and go with somebody that only goes on premise and focuses on premise and just sells draft beer? Or do they want to go in the most important channels, the C-store and grocery channels?
So this chat tonight was probably received the most volume of questions ahead of time than we've had.
Shocking.
And
Come on,
and I'm
bring them
going
on, I say.
to if you have a question that you want to ask Lester and Kimberly, you are welcome to put it in the chat box tonight. You can send it to me directly as a message. I will also pause later on. You can ask it yourself. But I think like both of you, what you've just been talking about for the last 10 minutes brings up a really great point. And this was the question verbatim. Distributors are the most opaque segment of the industry to consumers. How can we report on them better? And there's a lot of coverage for the producers. There's coverage of what happens with the retailers. The middle tier is kind of this nebulous area where if it's just something big, there's a story that gets reported. So for the journalists who are here tonight and then watching afterward too, Kimberly, how should we consider ways to report better on this segment?
Well, I don't think anyone on the chat today has ever been a beer distributor, with the exception of myself, or has worked for a beer distributor. I don't know who's all on the chat, but has worked for a beer distributor, maybe probably doesn't even know a beer distributor. For the most part, beer distributors aren't seeking notoriety or, a lot of attention. They are a very, different club of of group. They're not really seeking any kind of national praise or anything like that. But I do think that when writers tend to, at least in my opinion, when writers tend to look at beer distributors, they typically, a lot of the things that I see and read are typically very negative. And beer distributors contribute a lot to their communities. They're very philanthropic. They're very family, or for the most part, very family oriented. And so I would encourage, the writers out there to meet a beer distributor. Like what beer distributors do you know of that live in your local market? How can you reach out to them? How can you maybe cover something positive that they're doing? Because the only positive things that I really, and this is a plug for National Beer Wholesalers Association, the only positive things that I ever see coming out of beer distribution media is coming actually from NBWA. And that's their job, is to support their members, of course. But I really don't see anything that positive spin that comes out. And there's a lot of positivity in the communities of things that they do. And I would like to see more of that.
In that tough nut to crack situation, so maybe don't like attention, but do things in their community, family businesses, pro tip, networking, I guess, in a way, like what would be a good way to approach that local distributor to say like, hey, it'd be great to meet you and know what you're doing?
Yeah, it's a really tough thing, I think, for me to say this right now during, the global pandemic. Yeah, knock on your door. Can I come see you? Because they're not even letting a lot of their suppliers in their warehouses right now. But it would be great if there wasn't, let's just say there wasn't a global pandemic, to go out with and see the market, reach out to your local distributor, go on a ride along if that's possible, go out and see what their warehouse, see what they do. And on the flip side, I think that beer distributors should probably be reaching out to their local writers as well to scoop stories of good things that they're doing in their community. And the same way that they want, their local politicians to come into their warehouse and kind of see what they're doing and understand the trials and tribulations of being a distributor. I think the same goes true for writers and for people that don't really understand the role of a beer distributor.
Lester, I'm going to have you come in just for reference too. I want to bring up the Beer Serves
Yeah.
America because you had referenced this before.
Yeah.
Maybe building off of what Kimberly had shared, from your perspective, what is it that might be able to take place for reporters to report about distributors in a better way?
Okay. When people ask me of this same question, I immediately go to airlines. I mean, I just Googled it. 4.5 billion flights every year, 42 million flights every 42 million flights take place every year. That's 115,000 flights a day. How many airline stories did we get today about planes crashing or planes landing successfully? No one wants to write about 115,000 planes landing successfully, but that's what beer distributors do. We land trucks successfully every day, and then the one time that things screw up,
Yeah.
it's a catastrophe. It's an outrage. The Bells and Reyes are fighting. It's a disaster. This must come to an end. But you know, hundreds of thousands of trucks are driving around every day, doing really good jobs and successfully delivering beer to retailers. And they do it because that's what they're programmed to do, and that's what they're paid to do, and that's what they like to do, and that's what they're really, really good at. So when you go to that Beer Serves America and you look through those numbers and you see beer distributors, you'll see 140,000 employees, you'll see the taxes and the wages and the output and all this other stuff. It's because those guys are helping to land all this beer that comes from all these brewers, and they're landing them into these little runways at convenience stores and grocery stores and, you know, Costco's and Walmarts and little small dinky dive bars on the street corner. And they're doing that every single day. So it's a lot of behind the scenes work. So how do you make 115,000 safe flights into a newsworthy story, right? So that's a challenge, but it's embedded behind that is just the support system that beer distributors deploy to make it happen. It's the route accounting, it's the logistics, it's the forecasting, it's how do I make sure you have a warehouse and it's, you know, how many, it could be 50,000 square feet, it could be 300,000 square feet. I don't know how many, it could be huge, but it's got to hold the right amount of beer for that market for a finite amount of time, because beer is a perishable product, right? So, you know, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, just like flying an aircraft, that you don't pay attention to, but it's incredibly important because, as we learned during the pandemic, being out of stock of your favorite 18 pack of whatever is an outrage. But, you know, for the other 364 days a year that 18 pack of beer was there successfully, no one even noticed. It was only when it wasn't there was a problem. So understanding just the detail and the work that goes into making sure that all these warehouses around the country have the right amount of beer for the right amount of time is actually pretty impressive and mind-boggling at the same time. And COVID taught us that when we saw certain markets with too much product and some markets with not enough product, we knew that the information we were using to make these decisions was kaput. It just wasn't making sense because people weren't traveling. They were staying home. They were buying larger packs. They weren't going out. And it just completely threw into disarray how we model, think about, forecast, and manage all of these 3 billion cases of beer that are moving around the country.
I'm going to pause here because what both of you were just talking about is a theme that I think came up often last year in these chats when we were talking about ways to find or uncover interesting stories. And perhaps one of the most repeated versions of that was when talking about agriculture and farmers. And so in the same way, our guests before were talking about kind of the high level ingredients that say go into a beer. Ultimately, it's the people who are, you know, boots on the ground in the fields making things happen. That seemed to come up often in terms of story. And so what I'm hearing from both of you, and I'm going to timestamp this for everybody too, is that if you have, say, a local publication, because this sounds like a very local thing, where a local community or a local family is running a local business, this seems like a throughway to a potential story idea. If you're talking about people in the community, Kimberly, like you're mentioning, do or focusing on philanthropy and the ways they can impact their local community. I just want to kind of highlight that for people when you're thinking about stories and the way that bringing that big idea, beer moving from here or there, keep on narrowing it down into what happens on a very local, small logistical level. And then combining that with Lester, what you're talking about, I think all of a sudden when you bring it into understanding with that community member, but then blow it up into, these are all the things that have to happen to get things from point A to, the downtown bar, for example.
Right. It doesn't just show up at the distributor's doorstep and show up in their warehouse and then it just goes out to retail. There's 100 different steps and different people involved to get that beer out. And it's a huge process, as Lester said, with logistics and forecasting and warehousing and trucks and it's just a huge process.
My poster child for this is the WISE systems folks, WISE. They're the ones that do route account. They take the route. So in the morning, a truck has to be loaded with beer, and then it has to ride a route such that the guy just needs to pull the beer off in sequential order and load it into the retail. But if you're driving down the highway and there's an accident and the road's closed, what do? I just can't go to the last account because then I'd have to unload all my beer and give them that and load it all back in. You need to be thinking on your feet every day. The minute you leave that beer distributorship, a car could crash in front of you and you need to figure out a way around. So the WISE systems guys have taken route accounting and they've added real-time data into it, traffic data. So then all of a sudden you're driving in your truck, you're looking for your next account. There's, I don't know, an accident in front of you, and then all of a sudden the WISE system reroutes you and says, okay, you need to do this, this, and this, and gives you instructions on how to mitigate that barrier to you getting your job done. But just imagine your own commutes, just in the little amounts of times that you drive around town, how many times the route doesn't work. These guys do that every day and they do really long routes, so that is just that little bit of extra technology makes the job so much more efficient and makes those cases land without any kind of events at the retailer, and then no one even thinks that anything happened. So there's behind the scenes in the beer industry are all of these suppliers and all these companies thinking about technologies and thinking about innovative ways to get beer to retail accounts more efficiently so that there isn't an outrage about what's going on.
I'm going to start jumping into some of the questions that we had submitted. So we might jump around a little bit. We're going to start with one that was focusing on consolidation. That's obviously been kind of a hot topic issue the last decade or so, but even more so the last few years for those who have followed it. I'm going to post this in the chat box as well so everybody can see it. But Kimberly, we'll start with you. The question here, they mention Reyes in particular.
Right.
They're one of the largest distributors in the country. The question is consolidation healthy for the competitive landscape for wholesalers? And does it encourage or discourage the formation of new wholesalers focused on craft? Kimberly, what are your thoughts on that question?
Well, I think, first of all, it's very difficult for a distributor just to come in, like a new distributor to come in and have a portfolio and have scale. So the distributors, the historic distributors that have been there for a while, they have a lot of scale and therefore they want to get bigger. Okay, no distributor is sitting here going, I think I'll get smaller. Okay, there is a market out there for beer distributors, and there's only so many people that can pay the price for a beer distributor, like if they were going to sell. And nobody's forcing these sales of beer distributors. Okay, there's not like somebody forcing the sale. It is that there's succession planning issues, there's family drama, whatever it is. that creates an opportunity for a sale. And there's only very few people that can consolidate and consolidate well, because you need to have your efficiencies. You don't go from, you're not a distributor in Florida and you're like, oh, I'm going to go find some efficiencies in Montana. It just doesn't work that way. Okay. So you have to find some kind of efficiencies of scale. And that's what all these consolidations are doing. I think there's going to be, I've said this before, there's going to be more consolidation. There are opportunities out there for smaller distributors to pop up, but distribution is expensive. It is not something that everyone can take on. It's very labor intensive, very capital intensive. You have to buy trucks, you have to find a warehouse, you have to be licensed, you have to have scale. So it is more difficult to just have a distributor, to just come in and to the market and decide, I think I'll be a distributor today. It can happen. Yes, it does happen. We've seen some examples of that, especially like, Scout in California, but it doesn't happen all the time. Is it healthy for the market? Well, it's less healthy. I will tell you this, it's less healthy for a distributor not to want to be a distributor anymore and not being able to find a buyer. So, and just kind of giving up. And that's, there are some bad distributors out there. There are some distributors that are for sale and cannot find a buyer because they're in the middle of nowhere and nobody wants to buy them. And they're just, it is a situation because distributors are multi-generational and you need to have those efficiencies of scale.
Kimberly, if I called you up, PINTS LLC, and said, tomorrow I do want to start my own distributor company, general ballpark, is there, of all those things you were just sharing, is there a general investment that you tell people? So are we talking like, $1 million is a minimum place to get in?
Well, it depends. Are you in a small town? Are you if you're in a major metropolitan area, that's not even going to scratch the surface.
Lester, I want to give you the opportunity to chime in on this question about consolidation too, just from the way that where you see things and the way that you talk with members of the Wholesalers Association. What is talk about how this is healthy or makes things challenging? What's the temperature there?
Well, consolidation is a fact of an open market. We have a free market where people are allowed to build businesses and sell them and, and do what they want, and to a certain extent that they become anti-competitive. And then at that point, the FTC, the Department of Justice, the attorneys general, they swoop in and do what they need to do. We saw that in the AT&T and the old Ma Bell world when they're like, this is insane, it's not working. We saw the executive order come out from the Biden administration about the meatpacking industry. We look to wine and spirits, and we can see a very few, very highly consolidated wine and spirits distributors that are national in focus, that they control very large share of the wine and spirits market. But then at the same time, we look at the wine and spirits market and we see literally thousands of the small independent boutique distributors that exist underneath this umbrella of three behemoths that are ruling the market. So it's not, it's not black and white. It's never black and white. It's always about balancing, entrepreneurship, competition, innovation with regulation, and trying to make all these things work effectively and fairly, if that, tough word, right, to say fairly in this, because, for someone who's spent multiple generations building a business and they've just gotten to the point where they want out, they're allowed to sell it at the highest price. And, that's their right. That's their business. It's their personal property. We have personal property rights in our country that allow people to dispose of their personal property the way they see fit. And if whoever's the highest bidder happens to be the largest guy, that's what's going to happen. And it's up to the regulatory environment to figure out how important it is and where it stands on the list of immediate concerns to the Department of Justice, the FTC, to swoop in and say, hey, there's a problem here. For a while, we complained, incessantly about how anti-competitive the U.S. brewing market was with AB and Miller and Coors owning well over 80% of the market. Well, that healed itself pretty darn effectively without any kind of government interference. And now we see Anheuser-Busch at maybe a 37 share when they were almost a 50 share in 2008. They're down to 37. We've seen what happened to Miller. We've seen what happened to Coors. They're not even two separate entities anymore. They're combined and they're still losing share. So, you know, the game's not over. It's never a beginning and an end. It's an evolution and a process. And I think with beer consolidation, this plays out until such point in time that it doesn't, and someone steps up and says enough is enough. But for now, I mean, even Reyes at their current level, I don't think they're 10% of the U.S. beer market in terms of the cases they have under their management. So, that's now California is a little bit different, but then California has Anheuser-Busch, who is this owner of the distribution that has a really large market share, which is even more mind-boggling. So you'd have to almost take California and just kind of, cause an earthquake and hope it falls off into the. I hope no one's from California. I hope you guys are mostly East Coasters here. My apologies. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. I mean, this is a really unique market over here with all these other, really unique outcomes as well. So a big macro question, and like Kimberly said, if you're in a small little rural market and you're seeing declining population year over year, that's a business that is, losing value every day. So you probably want to get out of it as quick as you can. And a consolidator is your best option to get the best price.
I want to pause there just to be able to offer the chance for anybody else to ask a question. So if you are curious about anything Kimberly or Lester just said, or anything we've talked about so far, I'll pause. You can unmute yourself and ask away.
I'll take some responsibility for that last question. To the point that you made about independent wholesalers forming recently, I'm in Chicago. We have a couple of examples of new small craft focused wholesalers, which is really exciting. At the same time, I see like Coca-Cola trucks with Reyes on them and like McDonald's trucks as well. And that was why Reyes was intentionally a part of that question, was that it's the wholesale on the part, or consolidation on the part of beer wholesalers, but there's bev in general and soda distributors and all these other things coming in. And I wanted to know, just to have some sort of perspective on whether that comes into the fairness element of the question.
Okay.
What?
Yeah, it was a very open-ended question. I mean, like, it's just the consolidation, with Reyes purchasing wholesalers in California.
Yeah.
I just kind of wonder about if my craft beer is going to come to my bar with a Coca-Cola truck in the future, or if these types of operations are going to be separate in the future.
You just don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's the statement. I mean, right now we have a functioning 3-tier system. It works in some places in varying degrees of intensity. California, not so much. Maybe down in the southeastern part of the United States, a little bit more regulatory environment. But how things play out, I think, is why we work in and live in a free market where businesses are doing so many things and trying to innovate and trying to do what they do best, which is to grow their businesses. So as long as there's demand, there will be craft beer. Who delivers it will be a function of how much people are willing to pay and how and who's got the best route to market. And like, let's go back to the airline industry. Who's landing the planes? I mean, do you want to fly on an airline that's crashing your cases every day, into your neighborhood? You want to be on the plane that lands safely every day. So a brewer is going to pick the safest airline to fly with, right? And if you don't want to be in your brother-in-law's Cessna smoking pot, flying around delivering cases.
No.
Let's put it that way.
I don't.
I want to ask a question that maybe
Think
builds
about
on
it. Just think about how that plays out.
Alexi. So like, this is what I'm thinking about. If anybody doesn't know, this is the "Is This Pigeon" meme. You've probably seen this around the internet. And the reason I'm thinking about this, because we're talking about beer and Coca-Cola trucks. Like, if Boston Beer is getting concentrate of Mountain Dew shipped to their facility to make a hard seltzer that's sold back to Pepsi to then sell that alcoholic product in a store, is this beer distribution?
Well, according to Mr. Jim Cook, if it's made in a brewery, then it's beer distribution. So he just said that last week. So that's his definition, and they're gonna try their hand at the Pepsi distribution system for Mountain Dew, and he said he'd see how it goes. So.
If this has been like a very interesting topic, we've got a question from the audience too to maybe follow up one step further on this too. So Jess, if you want to chime in, feel free.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, guys. So on the topic of Blue Cloud, I don't know that either of you can answer this, but do we see Pepsi, like they're just inventing their own distribution system from whole cloth to sell hard Mountain Dew? And so if our only hard Mountain Dew, one, I can't imagine them not taking on other brands. And two, like, do they have any appetite for on-premise? I feel like it'd be really hard to all of a sudden get into like a draft game if you've never done it before. Are you guys hearing any kind of scuttlebutt out there?
Lester,
I mean,
I haven't heard any.
They got some trucks, they got some product, they got some warehouse, they're gonna try it, they're gonna figure it out. Obviously, they got superfluous cash to spend on this. You know, maybe they win, maybe they lose. Like I said in the beginning, I mean, there's no law. I mean, they figured out a way and a path that allows them to try this out. And that's what we do in a market economy. We're not a command economy where we have to go watch the great leader if we're allowed to do this. And as for permission slip, we have a market-based economy. So they've analyzed, they've looked at the regulatory environment, and they're proceeding down this path. Now, maybe they'll succeed, maybe they won't. I mean, I certainly want to chat off record. I'll give you my personal opinion. It'll certainly be colorful and include a lot of planes and brother-in-law smoking dope, but that's beside the point. So
oh my God, I'm gonna call you tomorrow just for this.
but no, but you know, as long as you know, there's a regulatory.
He's shaking his pen at you.
there's a regulatory structure, and we follow it, and that's what we do, and that's what businesses do. So operating within the boundaries gives them this this pursuit, and they're going to do it. And we all sit back and say this is insane, but maybe they see something we don't. I don't know. I'm not in their heads, and I'm certainly not in the boardroom. And you know, like you said, how do you know, hard Mountain Dew on tap just doesn't sound like a lot of fun to me personally. So why even go there? But you know, stacking it, you know, a mile high and you know, a half mile deep in a big box retailer like a Walmart might be a gold mine for them.
Right.
I am going to go to another question that was submitted before tonight's chat. Speaking of changes in the marketplace, this one is about CBD and THC. Because certainly you walk into a convenience store or grocery store and you drive, you know, a few miles down the road, you'll find a CBD store or products. As these things become more ubiquitous, especially as more states legalize THC, and THC beverages being an important part of that growth. So the question is if they will ever be integrated into the alcoholic beverage distribution networks. Kimberly, have you had conversations with ways to maybe at least think ahead of how this might be considered?
I think that the people that I've talked to, unless it's going to be, you know, federally acceptable, I mean, no distributor is going to give up, you know, their license to try, you know, obviously try this. And right now, it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to just drop a few cases off at a dispensary unless you're going to be able to see this at grocery or C-store, you know, actual actual products that they can sell and deliver. There's no profit in it for a distributor at this point. You know, I don't know what's going to happen in the future when legalization opens up completely, what we're going to see. But from dropping a few cases off a dispensary, it just doesn't make sense profit wise for a distributor to do that.
Lester, similarly on the larger scale, are there conversations you're privy to?
So frustrating, so incredibly frustrating, because everyone keeps it in, you know, kind of contained within one concept, and it's multiple concepts, right? We have CBDs, which are kind of health related, focus. You know, if you have epilepsy and you need CBD, you know, it works and it's proven to work, right? So that whole medical world of CBDs is kind of over here. And then we kind of have this, I would just want to get stoned and go to sleep world, which, you know, is kind of over there. And then you kind of have this little middle space. And I think everything, what we're talking about is what's happening in that middle space. What's the recreational opportunity for all this, and where does it fall? Well, right now we don't have the middle space. We don't have any space for cannabis, right? And we haven't even we're so far ahead of ourselves on this discussion, because we have all these laws that just stop everything right here, and everyone wants to. So it's like we gotta get through at least the first step before we start talking about steps 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. I mean, we don't even have banking rules. We don't. It's not even legal at the federal level. And people are like, well, we're going to have this, and we're going to have that. I'm going to be here, and you're going to do this, and I want this. It's going to go on my truck. It's like, what are you guys talking about? You got to move. This is very long step-by-step process. And, and, you know, the FDA is in charge of our health, right? The Food and Drug Administration takes care of all those things that are aspects of the medicines and the things we put in our bodies, right? For health reasons. And then we have food and enjoyment things like alcohol and soda and all the things that we like to enjoy for recreational reasons. And everyone just wants to throw marijuana out there into this world and immediately start figuring out where it goes before let's get the immediate. If we all concentrated on just solving this federal problem of legalized or not legalized, then we can move on to these other discussions, which are mute at this point, and just
pie in the sky.
Just pie in the sky stuff.
Well,
AKA sea canopy growth.
Let's turn to a more timely topic then. Kimberly, I flagged this because I thought this was a really great point that was shared from the PINTS LLC Twitter account. And you had mentioned recently during our chat that you had been at the Beer Summit. This is the Beer Business Daily conference event.
Yeah.
And this mentioned that obviously with this kind of touches on everything we've been talking about for 40 minutes, convergence, different products, the way that people are thinking about this. Could you give a little sense, and you've talked about convergence, you've mentioned it before, both thinking about in terms of what we see here with the way that maybe people should be thinking about spaces beyond beer, or at least understanding them better. What's going on here? How can we better understand what's meant with this?
Well, this was, you know, the beer people stayed at the Beer Summit, and there are very few people that went to both summits. And this, Dan and I felt both summits should have been together, because we're talking about you know, ready to drink cocktails, that are going and beer distributors if they're licensed for it. In some cases, some aren't, but and they go on talking about hard Mountain Dew. You know, we're talking.
Are you breaking? Is it the audio breaking up, or is that my laptop?
You hear? Okay.
It's a little funky. Here's what we'll do.
All right.
Kimberly, if you want to try something real quick, would you mind? We're gonna MacGyver this. Turn off your video. If you want to pick that back up, here's what we'll do. Don't get that. And then if you want to carry on, we'll still have your
Okay.
avatar.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So at both summits, we heard from Constellation. We heard from Constellation Beer. We heard from Constellation, wine and spirits and what they're doing in the marketplace. We heard about ready to drink. We heard about non-alc. We heard about, better for you drinks and how better for you and low alcohol is playing a role in both spirits and cocktails and beer. And so it's all kind of together. And we just felt that the two summits could actually be together because most of these products are going through wine and spirits and beer, traditional beer distributors trucks, and a lot of the audience for these conferences, many of them are beer distributors and wine and spirits distributors. You had the people from Breakthrough there, from Southern Glazers, and all the major beer distributors there. So it just made more sense for us to be talking about how the market is doing as a whole than segmenting it ourselves, because traditional, when we're talking about the role of distribution now, the traditional independent beer distributor isn't just calling a lot of times on just one beer buyer. They're calling on the beer buyer. They might be calling on the wine buyer. They might be calling on in the natural foods area of the store, because they might be selling something like coconut water, or they might be selling some other kind of, Pellegrino or something like that. So they're calling on all areas of the store. And because of that, there's this convergence, as I said. And that's very different from when I first started and we were selling 5 different brands. And I think when we sold our company, we had 1,500 different SKUs in our warehouse. It was just, there was a lot more product.
Lester, I'm going to jump in with another timely question that was submitted while we were chatting. I am going to remind everybody, if you've got a question you want to ask, we'll go for about 5 more minutes or so. So feel free to send a note to me in the chat box if you'd like to ask something or ask the question. Lester, this one's about pricing, something a lot of people are thinking about right now, especially 21 coming in 2022. I'm going to post this in the chat box so everyone can see it too. This is a question as basically going from one place to the next. The question was, with cost of goods rising for suppliers and most of them increasing their price to wholesaler, are you seeing distributors raise their margins respectively? And if so, how much? So this is thinking about cost of goods, prices from point A to B.
You're going to regret asking me this question, my friends. You're going to regret it. Price, no one gets to just take price. We live in a market economy where price is determined by supply and demand, the willingness of the consumer to meet the price of the supplier. All this nonsense about I'm going to raise prices 5-6% because my cans and my labor and everything else more is not a reality. This is not how systems work. The reality is that we're in an inflationary moment, right? Labor's going up, cost of goods sold are going up. And the natural instinct is to push these prices forwards, but you just don't push prices unless there's a matching demand over there. And beer for the last 10 to 12 years has taken price above inflation year in and year out. It is still ahead of inflation over a long period of time. So the relative balance between beer, wine, spirits, and all the other goods that you get is a function of the consumer's willingness to pay for these products to meet the marginal cost of producing these products. And if the margin's not there, it's not going to be there. So there's disconnect in how people think about how the economy works and how the beer market works, is that it's a dance between suppliers and consumers and the distributors in the middle. Are they going to try to take margin? Of course they are, because that's what we do. Is how much of this is going to stick and stay? I don't know. Why don't you ask the 3,000 Peloton people that got laid off today, for crying out loud, because no one wants their stupid bikes. The reality is, if you go too far and too hard, you find yourself out on the street looking for a new job. It's a balance. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen? I don't know, but I can tell you for sure that it's going to be a dance between suppliers and consumers, with retailers and distributors in the middle, and consumers making a choice between beer, wine, and spirits, because they are very close substitutes, and you can change them out pretty interchangeably, unless you're a diehard beer drinker and you'll never drink a glass of wine. But I think that's unique to a smaller segment of the population. The majority of the population are going to be price sensitive in a rising inflationary environment. And folks better be really careful, because when we get to our first big holiday in May, we're going to we just may see a whole bunch of discounting back to 2020 pricing, right? So everyone's going to try to take more price, just like every good worker is going to go into their employer and demand a higher salary, and give me more money or I'm going to leave. I mean, it's happening around the economy on the wage side. We see it, what's happening on the cost of goods sold from cans and bottles and all that other stuff. So you just don't get to take more margin. You just don't get to take more price without dancing with the consumer first. So, we had the music hasn't started playing really in the beer market. Our beer market is at its height in June, July, and August, right in the summer, when we're selling the most beer and everyone's out and about, and that's seasonality drives our beer market for the summer. So the dance hasn't even started. People are they're looking across, they're looking for dates to dance with and all this other stuff, but who's going to walk away with the most price and who's not going to get it is going to play out. But it's not. It just drives me nuts when people are like, oh, I'm going to take price by 5% because I'm paying more for my stuff. And good luck with that attitude, because it's not how it works in a market economy. Just not how it works.
Everybody throw up your fire emojis. Lester, bring in the heat.
But I've been getting these questions a lot. And it's like there was a bunch of stories on the can industry, and not a single person mentioned draft, right? It's cans are more expensive, cans are more expensive. Well, if cans are more expensive, the perfect substitute is a draft, right? Go out and develop your own premise. And if you can't afford these cans and you can't afford getting them into these off-premise accounts, why are you ignoring 3,000 on-premise accounts? I mean, you gotta take what the good market gives to you. And we have on and off-premise, we have bottles, cans, and drafts. And if something's getting too expensive, you better start figuring out a strategy to use something more. That's the way it is.
That's a story tip for anybody who's interested in reporting on can stuff from Lester for you. Ask about draft. Kimberly, we'll close things out with you. This question that was submitted before we started chatting tonight seems like a good place to kind of circle back to. It's a simple one with perhaps a not so simple answer, or a complicated one. Is why do we still need a 3-tier distribution system today?
I think we, absolutely do, because, brand rights are the most important thing for a beer distributor. And for a beer distributor to be able to capture the taxes, to be able to service the marketplace, to be able to also, if there's recall system in place. I mean, let me preface this, that the 3-tier system works very well in the US. It doesn't work for everyone, and not every brand should be distributed. Like, absolutely 100%. I don't think that everyone gets the entitlement of having all their brands distributed, just as Lester said, that the I lost my train of thought. Sorry. I totally lost. I was going to say something back to what Lester said, but
Just don't get to take price because you got price. You just don't.
Yeah.
Distribution,
okay,
it's not a
that's
right.
what I was.
I
Yeah,
think that's okay.
distribution isn't a right. Just the way you don't get to take price. Thank you very much. I think that, you know, beer distribution is a lot of hard work. There's a lot of infrastructure that goes into it, from sales to ordering to accounting and everything. And like, if somebody wants to self-distribute and they're able to in their state, and I 100% believe that if they want to, they should be able to. That's one of the archaic things. If they want to take on that role, I honestly believe that they should start there. That's some advice for startups. Start as a self-distribution. But I do believe that the 3-tier system does work. And it works for supplying choice for so many people. When you think about the kind of power some of the larger brewers can put on the marketplace, if they were all distributing their own brands. I mean, we talked a little bit about California and what a mess that is because of the Anheuser-Busch WODs and how that's legal in that state. If that happened throughout and you didn't have independent beer distributors, there would be a lot of undue influence. There was a question about pay to play and about some of the tricks that happen out there. You would see a lot more of that. And so I do believe that the 3-tier system works very well. It doesn't work for everyone, but it works well for, you know, thousands of breweries out there.
And
Absolutely. What she said is absolutely correct. I mean, we're the only country that has this 3-tier system, and we have the best craft beer craft beer imported market. You know, you have it all, right? And it's because there's these walls between these market influences at different stages. Even though they're not perfect, they're there. And you know, even when you look at what Pepsi and Boston Beer are doing with Mountain Dew, they're navigating these walls, but it still didn't stop them from just blowing into the market and just knocking everything out with giant displays of hard Mountain Dew, which if you didn't have a 3-tier system, every grocery store and every retailer you walked into this country, you'd be walked right smack into a freaking Mountain Dew display because there was just no way of controlling it. So you got to accept that this has created one of the best beer markets in the history of mankind. How's that?
And when you talk about, I was just going to say real quick, if you talk about what's fair, and, you know, it's kind of like you can't talk about the 3-tier system and say it's not fair, because it's fair to a great deal of people, and it works very well. And it's you know, the most robust system of beer selling in the world.
Kimberly, Lester, thank you for so many adjectives.
Goodness gracious. You guys don't want
It's
to keep
robust.
going?
We love beer.
Things I want to throw at you, but
Thank you.
Well,
Thank
if
you.
anyone has any questions, you could DM me or email me. We're happy to help.
Yeah, let's I had the Twitter handles, at least for Lester and Kimberly, on hand for you to reach out, follow up. Lester, Kimberly, thank you so much for being a part of this tonight, for sharing so much with us. Thanks everybody for being here.
All right.
cheers, guys.
Kimberly,
Thank you for having me.
Thanks everybody.
Bye. Sure.